is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Friday in November. First Friday pod in a long time. We are here to preview the Eagles and the Ravens on Sunday at 4:25. We're also going to dive into the penalties that have beleaguered this Ravens team. We'll also take a look at the defensive improvements over the last couple of weeks, and we'll be joined by Philly.com's Olivia Reiner to take a closer look at Sunday's matchup. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years, from developing hybrid technology to upping the standards of safety and efficiency. Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. And with a superior lineup of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more. Toyota, let's go places. Jonas, how was your Thanksgiving?
Well, my Thanksgiving was good. Merry, full of food. The Bears-Lions game was fun until it became a catastrophe at the end. I actually missed the comeback while we were driving to DC. But yeah, good hoops on in the background too. It's always a wonderful day for sports and family and food.
It really is. It really is. It was everybody loved the ending of that Bears game. That was really something to behold. Jonas, we're going to talk about this Ravens team. This team that is on the verge of the playoffs has a 99% chance of making the postseason at this point, but the seeding is still very much in doubt. According to the New York Times playoff picture, let's be honest, they're not getting that one seed. That's either going to go to Buffalo or Kansas City. But what is the most likely seed for the Ravens to end up with in the playoffs here?
It comes down to whether they're going to get that AFC North title, which they are currently favored to do. So if they do that, I think the strong odds suggest that it will be the 3 seed. So they would get the second worst wildcard seed, the number 6. They're at 44% odds right now to get the 3 seed, according to the New York Times. Just 18% to get the 2 seed. I think that doubles if the Ravens win on Sunday and the Chiefs lose to the 49ers. So I think that suddenly becomes back in play if things work out the Ravens' favor this weekend. But more likely than not, it's either going to be
and now we're joined by
3 seed as the AFC North champions, or probably the highest rated wildcard seed, which would be the 5 seed.
Gotcha. And that AFC North title still very much in doubt. The prognosticators have the Ravens still with a above 50% chance of winning that division, even though they've already lost to the Steelers. But we talked about on last week's podcast that a lot of that is just due to the fact that a lot of these measures, these models, think that the Ravens have a stronger team. It's not necessarily all about the record that they produced thus far. And it's not like they give them 50-50 odds of winning every game the rest of the way. It's just the Ravens have a good chance because they, in a lot of ways, line up better than the teams that they face over the last few weeks.
Yeah, and obviously we'll find out. Sunday could really be a moving day for the AFC North in general, because even though the Ravens are not playing an AFC North team, the Steelers and the Bengals are going at it. So either the Bengals are losing and effectively getting eliminated. I think they have like 8% odds right now, and those go down to 1% if they lose, or the Steelers win, or the Steelers lose and the Ravens, AFC North title odds go up to like 75-80%. So a really, really significant kind of, not quite loser leaves town match. But if you're a Ravens fan and you're a hater of the AFC North, then that game could really give you something to chew on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, this team is in good shape right now, especially after that win over the Chargers. That really felt like a watershed moment for this team. Could go one way or the other. And the fact that they come out of LA with a convincing win certainly bodes well for the future. They got the elite offense when all things are humming. When they are playing at their best, they have the best offense in the league. And the defense over the last couple of weeks, we'll dive into it in a little bit, but the improvements that they've made over the last 2 games certainly give you a sign of hope. So you're looking at this team and you're thinking, what could possibly be their downfall other than Justin Tucker missing field goals at critical moments? And it's been the penalties. I know a lot of Ravens fans have been wringing their hands over the penalties all season long. And especially last week, it was an underrated storyline that they committed 9 more penalties for over 100 yards in their win over the Chargers. They currently lead the NFL with 101 penalties. Now, granted, they've played one more game than a lot of other teams. They also lead the NFL in penalty yardage. They have committed 9 more penalties than the next closest team, which is Houston. Penalties could very much be this team's bugaboo when it comes to the playoffs. And I looked at the last time a good team, a playoff team, led the league in penalties, because limiting penalties is a good sign of good coaching. But there are instances where there are good teams that are near the top of the league in penalties because of luck, because of something that they're doing. A lot of this has been luck. I mean, remember week 1 when the Ravens became the poster child for, the linemen not being lined up on the all on the line of scrimmage, and that became, the point going forward for the officials. So a lot of it has been luck. But the last time there was a good playoff team that led the NFL in penalties, it was the 2021 Dallas Cowboys, who had 12 wins. They lost to the 49ers in the wild card game, in a game in which they committed 14 penalties. And it's been a lot of, for this Ravens team, I mean, it's been a lot of different things. There's been no one leading culprit. They've 36 different Ravens have committed penalties. Patrick McCary leads the way with 11. He's got 7 holding penalties. He's got 1 false start, 3 other. Ronnie Stanley has 9 penalties, but they've committed penalties on both sides of the ball. It's a lot of veterans. It's not just the young guys committing penalties. What to you, Jonas, is the cause of this? And now that we're 12 weeks in, is there a way that they can fix this down the stretch, or is this just who they are and they got to roll the dice when it comes to the playoffs?
I mean, you have the bye coming up, so that'll give them an opportunity to look at just the top-down teaching that they want to do. Obviously, they have officials at every practice, not necessarily, Carl Sheffer's level quality, but still guys who know the game and who know the rule book pretty thoroughly. So you would expect that to have some oversight and to help them just go about their way in terms of staying out of trouble. But I don't think there is a silver bullet. I mean, obviously, I think Patrick McCary has kind of become the the person whose face has been attached to most of this. If besides John Harbaugh, he's the one who's getting all the flags, getting the inopportune flags, and I think they're overshadowing what has been a pretty good season for him. No one, I think, really expected him to be the full-time starter, nor did they expect him to be the full-time starter inside. But he, prior to this year, wasn't a guy who was called for holding a lot. And it's not like, going from the outside where you're going against very fast, very strong guys, to the inside where you're going against stronger but less fast, defenders would have exposed some athletic limitation in a way that it hadn't before. He's still a guy who's relying with his quickness, with his technique, still doesn't really have, long arms. So I don't know what has been the problem there for him. Obviously, you want to point to the coaching, but I think in the big picture, this is a Ravens offensive line that has come together in a way that we certainly didn't expect it would. I don't think we expected, a top 10 by week 13 level quality. So, you take the good with the bad, I guess, and you hope to kind of iron out some of these things. Obviously, if these guys are just beat up and it's tough for them to do everything they need to do mentally, along with what they have been doing physically, because just you get these bumps and bruises, then certainly the bye week is going to make life a little bit easier. And then coming out of the bye week, you get the Giants, which is basically just a minor speed bump at this point, especially considering it looks like Dexter Lawrence, their stud defensive tackle, will probably be missing that game with a dislocated elbow. So that, I'm sure there'll be like 2 touchdown favorites in that one. But you just got to figure a way to, I don't know, you can't really choose the times that you are committing penalties because every play could potentially be significant in the long run. But you just got to go back to the teaching board, go back to how you're teaching these practices. Obviously, they do a good job of recording pretty much everything they do so that they can go back and look at the teach tape and see what needs fixing. And it's bad right now. I mean, just to kind of refresh the EPA numbers, they have lost basically like 10 touchdowns worth of penalties in terms of total EPA for offense and defense. And there's probably some more on special teams there. So that might be the difference between them having, 1 loss, 2 losses on the season. But here they are with 4-7. With 4, excuse me.
Yeah, I mean the game against the Steelers in Pittsburgh was the high water mark for the penalties, when they essentially, they made a lot of mistakes in that game. Justin Tucker missing a couple of field goals, but if they don't commit as many penalties as they do in that game, there's a good chance they come out of there with a win. It's just a matter of playing clean football down the stretch, matter of playing clean football in the playoffs. But when it's been a problem throughout the regular season, you get worried going into a game that they're going to be, revert to their nature and commit a lot of penalties. And you look at a game like Sunday where you've got AJ Brown, who you could commit defensive holding on, you could commit defensive pass interference, and that could be a big play. Jalen Carter, if you're holding him up the middle because you're trying to stop him from getting to Lamar Jackson, that could be a problem. I guess the glass half full way of looking at this, though, is saying they're still this good. They're still, 8-4 with the number of penalties that they have been committing so far this season. So, and another thing is, yes, they're near top of the league in rushing yards per game, but it's not like they're so reliant on the rush that if they get backed up 10 yards because of a holding penalty and it's 1st and 20, that Lamar can't pass his way out of that. The passing offense is almost as good as it is if not better than the rushing offense. So, if there was a team that was over reliant on the run, like maybe the Philadelphia Eagles, they get backed up to start a drive and they can't dig themselves out of the hole. For this Ravens team, offensively, if they incur a lot of penalties, they can still drive down the field and overcome a lot of that. They couldn't against the Steelers, but for the most part this year, they have been able to do that. And on the defensive side, we're just going to have to bank on the fact that they've gotten a little bit better in that regard over the last couple of weeks. You wrote on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. You took a look at the last 2 games, the Steelers and the Chargers games, and the defensive improvements that Zach Orr's unit has made on that side of the ball. And after all of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that they've undergone through the first couple months of the season, they've kind of put together an okay November. I mean, I'm not necessarily going to say that they've turned the corner, but they're clearly playing with a whole lot more confidence. They may have found a safety tandem that works in Kyle Hamilton and Ardarius Washington now that Marcus Williams has hit the bench. Tre'Davious White is making some contributions at cornerback as well. Brandon Stevens actually knocked down some 50-50 balls over the last couple of weeks. What to you stood out when you were analyzing the defense, Jonas, and why do you think it might be sustainable?
Well, I think the reason that it might be sustainable is that it hasn't just been, a bunch of tomato cans that they've been going up against. I mean, obviously, the fact that all of the metrics that I had in that story, 6th in success rate, 11th in EPA per play, 8th in yards per play, that's with that game against the Bengals, who, right now have the 6th best offense according to FTN, but then you have the Chargers, who are 13th. You have the Broncos, who are 19th, but probably even higher if you weight that more towards some of their recent games. And then the Steelers, who are only 22nd, but, it's not like they've been going up against bottom third defenses for November. Those are 4 respectable enough offenses in the composite. And I think I think probably the most notable thing to me was just the pass rush coming along the way it has. I don't know how sustainable it is based on some of the underlying metrics, but we had talked about how to start the year, the Ravens had this quite high sack total, and some of that was a bit of an unsustainable sack rate, and then that kind of petered out. And the reason that they still ended up getting as many sacks as they did was just because they were going up by as many points as they were and having opportunities to actually get to the opposing quarterback and bring him down. I think by the end of, like week 8, their sack rate was near the bottom of the league. But these past couple of weeks since week 9, they've been, I think, 5th in pressure rate. They're still getting a whole bunch of sacks. I think they're only behind the Chargers for sacks. I think they have like 15 in the past 4 weeks. So, they're getting some production through the middle. Obviously, with that, you had the Odafe Oweh breakout game against the Steelers that was in there. You've seen some contributions from the secondary, which was obviously a staple of the Mike Macdonald defenses the past 2 years. So you would like to see some more quick pressures. You would like to see some more quick sacks, but I think the fact that they have been able to get these pressures without having to blitz a whole lot, that Chargers game being the exception where they played a lot of man defense because they were, getting after these quarterbacks with a lot of blitz looks. I think it bodes well for them. Just the fact that, quarterbacks have not been able to have, for one, clean pockets, or 2, easy throwing lanes to kind of get that ball out. If you drop 7 every single time and you're depending on your guys to win with 4, then you better be sound in the back end. And, obviously there have still been some blown coverages and some mix-ups that maybe better quarterbacks more like Joe Burrow would have punished them for. But I think overall, considering what they've dealt with, considering some of the injuries that they've dealt with up front, with Travis Jones not being fully healthy, Michael Pierce being out, obviously the run defense has still remained elite. I think there's some good signs there that potentially this defense just can't be a total albatross on this historically good offense.
Yeah, I mean, what's crazy is that the run defense still being as good as it has been all season. They really haven't had a letdown game all season long. And when you have a run defense that good, you say, well, okay, you force the opposing offense to be one dimensional. And opposing offenses have just taken that and said, okay, our one dimension is just going to be outstanding. And it has been. But the last 2 weeks, they've limited explosive plays through the air. And like you said, maybe better quarterbacks take advantage of those kind of this secondary last couple of weeks. I mean, and better wide receivers would probably take advantage of it. They faced George Pickens 2 weeks ago, but the Chargers have Quentin Johnston and Jalen Reagor and Ladd McConkey. It's not like they're lighting the world on fire. So that's why this Sunday's game will be incredibly important, because they could be facing 2 top tier wide receivers. They will at least be facing one in AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. We don't yet know the status of. Let's talk about some of the injuries coming into this game, because we got some unfortunate news about a Ravens tight end, Charlie Kolar. Has a broken arm. You saw him in a sling after the Chargers game. He's expected to miss about a month, according to John Harbaugh. He's quietly become very important for this Ravens offense as a blocker, occasionally a pass catcher, but he played a whopping 54 snaps against the Chargers. So that is definitely going to be a blow for this offense if he does, in fact, miss all of December.
Yeah, it was wild to go back and look and try to find exactly how he might have hurt his arm, because usually if you go through the NFL Pro video database, it's typically the last play that a guy plays is when they get hurt, but he's in there at the end of the game, like bumping fists against the Chargers. But what was interesting is that I think Charlie is naturally right-handed, and the arm that he hurt was his right arm, but he's bumping fists with the Chargers guy with his left hand, because he can't actually raise his right arm, but he still played a lot of snaps. So I guess he just must have been full of adrenaline to get through a freaking broken arm in a game that is already a car crash. But I mean, I think obviously that is the position where you feel most comfortable about losing some depth there. They lost Isaiah Likely for a game, and the Ravens were fine. You have Patrick Ricard there to be the less versatile kind of blocking inline tight end. Obviously, if you want to get super heavy, then Charlie Kolar being out limits you in a way, because you can't have Charlie Kolar as the inline blocker and then Pat Ricard as that kind of I formation fullback. But still, I think that they have enough guys there who are respectable enough blockers to kind of still do what they want. And if you don't feel comfortable playing with heavy personnel, then that's what Deontay Johnson is for. I know that the 3 receivers looks that the Ravens had against the Steelers were not all that successful, but we're a couple weeks removed from that. You would assume that some of that chemistry with Lamar has improved, some of that comfort with Todd Monken and having to figure out how these guys all work together has improved as well. So I think probably pretty good timing for Charlie. You hate to miss any time at all, but you get the bye coming up. You get the Giants coming up. I guess it's a bit of a race against the clock to see whether you could be back for that game against the Texans on Christmas Day. But it seems likely that he'll at least be back for a potential playoff push.
And then you have Kyle Van Noy, who's missed the last 2 practices with hamstring/neck. That could be tough if he's going up against, Jordan Mailata or Lane Johnson on the Eagles offensive line. Roquan Smith obviously missed that Chargers game. We saw Malik Harrison step up, and a bunch of other cavalcade of other linebackers step up in his place and actually perform pretty well. But you'd like to get him back. Suffered that hamstring strain against the Steelers. Limited Wednesday and Thursday. What do you think? Do you think he's coming back for this game, Jonas?
It would seem likely. I mean, when we saw him, I think we talked about this before that Chargers game. He was running around pretty well, and then he was back out there at practice on Wednesday, and was limited, but didn't really seem to be that concerned. I guess maybe you're a little bit worried about the weather if it's particularly cold, because hamstring injuries can be kind of nasty if you're not sufficiently warmed up and you tweak something again. But again, you get the bye week to potentially recover from that. So maybe he's back on a pitch count, but just considering how he looked both on Monday night and then also, excuse me, on Wednesday at practice. Uh, you would think that he's going to be back. That's just kind of how guys who are back on Wednesdays usually progress. But I guess you don't want to really take any chances with not only Roquan, but a Roquan with a hammy.
Yeah, and then you've got Michael Pierce on the defensive line, who is the run stuffer, and they've actually done well without him, but that run defense could be even more stout if you get him back because he's designated to return off injured reserve on Wednesday after suffering that calf injury, and he's missed a lot of time. Hasn't played since week 8 when he got hurt. So they have a window now where they can reactivate him. What do you think about his timetable?
Yeah, Harbaugh said he was optimistic about getting him back there. Obviously, the fact that it is a lower body injury makes you a little bit concerned about just has he been is he strong enough there? Has he been able to go to the weight room, do all these lower body stuff that makes him such an effective player? I think as we'll talk about in the preview, I think it is really important for the Ravens that they have stout run defenders, and Michael Pierce would be a very, very stout run defender. And if he comes back for this, it would be incredibly well timed. So, usually when Harbaugh says he's optimistic about someone coming back, especially from injured reserve where there's no real recurrence of that injury, then chances are that they do play. But obviously, the fact that they waited as long as they did to designate him to return, it wasn't like he came back last week. I think maybe there's a slight more hesitation, but and also the fact that we only just got eyes on him the one day can't really give a full estimation of where he is physically. But if you just need him to play 10, 20, 25 plays, then it would seem like that would be something reasonable for a guy who still, even before he got hurt, wasn't a full-time player, because obviously that's Travis Jones' spot right now.
Right, and Travis Jones has been playing very well. All right, let's dive into this preview. Eagles and Ravens on Sunday at 4:25, and there are a lot of similarities between these two organizations right now, Jonas. They're two teams with pretty strong ownership and mostly stable structures. Two teams with dual threat quarterbacks who weren't drafted in the top 20, but they hit on them later. And actually, the Ravens traded with the Eagles, if you recall, back in 2018 to go up there and to get Lamar Jackson. And actually, the Eagles may have repaid the favor as well when later they extended Jalen Hurts in a contract that kind of set the market for Lamar Jackson signing his extension with the Ravens. So there's a lot of weird connections with these two teams. Nelson Aguilar has been employed by both of these teams at one point in his NFL career. And the biggest similarity, of course, Jonas, is that these two teams are bringing the running back back. They're making the running backs sexy again. They signed big-time all-pro running backs in free agency. Saquon Barkley to the Eagles, Derrick Henry to the Ravens, and both of them have earned MVP hype this season. They have already topped over 1,300 yards. They are doing it in the passing game. They're doing it in the running game. I don't know if we'll ever see another running back free agent class like the one that we just saw, because it was absolutely star-studded. But both those running backs went into free agency intent on testing the limits of just how depressed the market could be for running backs. They got sizable deals, but you look at the contracts that they signed compared to the output that they're giving for their teams, and both these teams ended up with a major bargain because they got superstar players to add to their already stable core, and they've been reaping the benefits.
Yeah, and they've been responsible for a lot of very annoying sports talk radio and sports talk TV, just because, sure, the Giants could have re-signed Saquon, and I guess sure the Titans could have re-signed Derrick Henry, but neither of those guys on either of those teams would have come close to the level of production that they're enjoying right now. I mean,
Yeah.
they're both obviously incredible talents, but Derrick Henry never played with anyone who made life easy for him as Lamar Jackson, and Saquon Barkley never played behind an offensive line anywhere close to as good as the one he's got in Philly. So, it's a shame that I guess for Saquon's case especially, he was just kind of floundering in that terrible Giants ecosystem. Obviously injuries set him back for some of those seasons where they were maybe better off, or gave him a better off chance of having a strong season. But both those guys made smart decisions where they went. They chose teams with either good or great quarterbacks or good to great offensive lines, and you're starting to see just how much of a force multiplier those running backs could be once they're on teams that, can actually give them a bit of a runway and can make explosive plays an actual realistic possibility instead of just a kind of, daydream like they were with Tennessee and with New York.
Right. We said it when they signed them that this doesn't work for every team. This is a instance where you have two teams that have good quarterbacks. You have two teams that have good offensive lines, even though the Ravens were turning over three guys on that offensive line. They've played pretty well this year, and good offensive structures around them. And these two teams saw the way that the running back market had been depressed, and they thought, well, here's a way for us to get a top tier talent at a position that is undervalued for much less than they should be going for. And they're having great years, not just because of who they are as players, but because of the offensive infrastructure around these two players. And, you saw pitfalls in the market as well. You saw, DeAndre Swift signed a pretty big deal with the Bears that ended up not turning out that well. And Tony Pollard, a guy we talked about in free agency, signing with the Titans, has not worked out that well. So because those two teams are not set up for success. No, they're not as good as Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, but also because, it's not just about paying for running backs, it's paying for elite players, and it's trusting the offensive infrastructure around them. The running backs are the icing on the cake. You can't necessarily build an offense around a running back anymore, but if you have a good structure around them, you can insert a top tier running back into that structure and pay it'll pay huge dividends. That's why my word of the day, Jonas, is bell cow. Bell cow is a cow, especially the lead cow of a herd, having a bell attached to his collar around the neck so that the herd can be located easily. First known usage, 1855 to 1860, right before the Civil War. It's an Americanism. And bell cow running backs are cool again. This is a rare time now where you've got two guys who are near the top of the league in terms of carries. The only difference in rushing yards for these two, 67, 1392 for Derrick Henry, or for Saquon Barkley, I should say, 1325. And Saquon has been doing it in one fewer game, leading the league with 223 attempts. So when it comes to stopping this Eagles offense, it starts with stopping Saquon Barkley. If you can figure out a way to stop Saquon Barkley, please forward your ideas to Zach Orr, because I'm sure he's trying and racking his brain right now. I have no idea how you stop this guy. The most recent performance where he blew off for more than 300 total yards, he is just as good as Derrick Henry's, different type of running back, but he can do it all. He's even more effective in the receiving game than Derrick Henry is at this point. Very different style running back, but Saquon Barkley is an absolute force to be reckoned with.
And then you dig into some of the numbers and you wonder, you don't wonder, it's his highlights are doing a lot for the idea of what this Eagles offense is. Like they are a good offense. That's for dang sure. They're 12th in DVOA, and I think part of the reason that we've seen Saquon feast is because they have not faced a good schedule of defenses by FTN. It is the worst in the NFL, and I think it's worse by a huge margin. Just their last 5 games: Bengals, Jaguars, Cowboys, Commanders, Rams. Not great. And like Philly's overall explosive run rate, which is the share of runs over, I think, 12 yards. Over 12 yards. They're like 11th or 10th. So I guess that is a credit to Saquon making explosives even more explosive than your garden variety explosive. But they're going up against their Ravens defense that is the best in the league at limiting those explosive runs. And they are probably maybe getting back, not only Roquan Smith, but also Michael Pierce as well. And I think so much of this game, when the Eagles have the ball, just comes down to, can the Ravens get away with not, dropping in their safety into the box to fit up the run? Because I think if they can get away with that, if they can defend at a, too high safety shells, then that gives them more flexibility and, shading their coverage toward A.J. Brown if they don't have to worry about Devontae Smith. So it's very easy for me to imagine a world where the Ravens are good on early downs and they get, Jalen Hurts into these obvious passing situations where he can be good, especially because he has Devontae Smith, because he has A.J. Brown, because he has Dallas Goedert. And, he's been more effective as a scrambler this year than in years past. But still, like, this offensive line, bunch of road graders up front, But whether it's because of them and their weakness up the middle, or because Jalen Hurts just doesn't have like any pocket sense, they're one of the lowest in the league in pressure rate allowed and in sack rate allowed. So if the Ravens are on every single drive forcing the Eagles into 3rd and 5, 3rd and 7, then it's not that inconceivable to imagine this Eagles offense, which has looked like world beaters for the past month or so, just really having a tough go of it.
Yeah, and we'll talk to Olivia Reiner in a bit about dealing with pressure, how Hurts has done that so far this year, because that was a huge issue for him last year. And you saw it rear its ugly head in the last half of the regular season where they go on that big losing streak and they get bounced in their first playoff game. He's been a whole lot better at it this year, and they found easier outs for Jalen Hurts when it comes to facing pressure. But if you can get in his face, you can affect how he deals with that pressure. He's going to take off and run a lot of the times. He's going to try to scramble. He's going to try to run outside the pocket. And he's not always going to be effective in that way. And that's part of the reason that this passing offense for the Eagles has not been above average. You know, they missed AJ Brown for a portion. They missed Devontae Smith for a portion. So getting both those guys on the field, they missed Dallas Goedert for a portion. Getting all three of those guys in the field is obviously huge for them at the same time. But, you know, Jalen Hurts has not been all that effective through the air. They are 25th in the NFL in passing yards per game. So it's maybe a matchup of offsetting weaknesses here with the Ravens pass defense not being great and the Eagles pass offense not being great either.
Yeah, I posed this question to you, Paul, in the doc. Who's going to have a bigger impact on this game, AJ Brown or Derrick Henry?
I mean, I think Derrick Henry. I still think that.
Sorry, AJ Brown or Saquon Barkley. I don't know why I said Derrick.
Henry. Saquon Barkley. Okay. If so, you're saying one would kind of eat into the other's production in this instance.
Just who's going to make a bigger mark on this game? Not who the Ravens are more concerned about, but who is going to do more in this game for the Eagles offense.
I think if I had to guess, it would probably be Saquon Barkley because of how good he's been. And because ever since, I think it was like week 4 and the Eagles had this meeting with their coaches there, they said, just run the ball, just run the ball behind this offensive line. Don't focus as much on getting a certain number of targets to Devontae Smith and to AJ Brown. And especially if Devontae Smith doesn't play in this game, AJ Brown will certainly be the number 1 target with or without Devontae Smith in this game. But Saquon Barkley has just been otherworldly, and I don't know how you go away from him at any point. It's the same conversation with the Ravens and Derrick Henry. If you give him more carries as the game goes along, odds are he's going to break one. And we saw that happen last week in the Eagles' last win. As the game was going along, they just kept feeding Saquon, and he would break run after run and take it to the house. So I don't know. I pick Saquon. Who would you think?
I think I would actually go AJ Brown. And
really?
I will say that, this might be a game on the Saquon side where the relative athletic deficiencies of someone like Darius Washington come into play.
Yeah.
Do you really want a guy who is that much shorter than Saquon, who is that much weaker and probably that much faster than him, being the guy to be your last level of defense if Saquon gets into the open field? It's obviously, it's not like Kyle Hamilton is this stud, run and jump athlete, but he's bigger, stronger, and he generally doesn't miss a whole lot of tackles. Darius, you wonder a little bit more about, especially if it's a kind of one-on-one, 10, 15 yards downfield. So watch out for that. But, even though this Ravens secondary has maybe turned a corner, I just think AJ Brown is just such a tough matchup for pretty much anyone who's going up against him. He doesn't do a whole lot of work in the slot. So I wonder how much of Marlon Humphrey he will see, but he's, got like 20 pounds on Marlon. So I don't know if Marlon's level of physicality is going to be as much of an issue for him. I mean, it certainly wasn't when the Ravens and Titans played, a few years back when AJ Brown was on that Titans playoff team. And then, you've got AJ Brown just being this downfield dynamo for Jalen Hurts, who's still a relatively good downfield thrower. And, Brandon Stevens has struggled to stop these go routes, these back shoulder fades, these double moves. And if that is what AJ Brown is running against him, then advantage AJ Brown. And then, you bring up Nate Wiggins and maybe he has the highest ceiling when it comes to like stopping AJ Brown. And AJ Brown, despite having missed those, few games this year because of injury, he's still, I think, like sixth in the NFL right now in missed tackles forced for wide receivers. And Nate Wiggins hasn't really had like hugely important missed tackles, but I think, looking at PFF last night, he's like 10th right now in the highest missed tackle rate among cornerbacks in the NFL. So because of how AJ Brown is built and because of how Nate Wiggins is built, you wonder, are we going to see, him kind of selling some of those vertical routes, converting into like a 10-yard post, and then just daring Nate Wiggins to tackle him in the open field before he can turn a 10 to 15-yard run into a 30 to 80-yard run. I mean, I think, or 10 to 15-yard catch into a 25 to 80-yard catch and run. I think that is probably a realistic possibility just because of how Nate Wiggins is built, and didn't see a lot of guys who are built like AJ Brown and Clemson. And I still think there is a bit of a learning curve there. So I just think that even though obviously you trust this Eagles offensive line more as the infrastructure for Saquon Barkley than you do like as Jalen Hurts as the infrastructure for AJ Brown, I just think that the matchup disadvantages for the Ravens to me are more clear up there.
Yeah, I mean, AJ Brown has 20 pounds on Marlon Humphrey. He's got 40 pounds on Nate Wiggins. They're the same height. They're both 6'1". And yes, Wiggins has missed a lot of tackles, but he's been very sticky in coverage this year. And I know that was when he was drafted, the Ravens front office said he was the best cover corner in the draft, they thought, coming out of Clemson. And he has lived up to that. But when you were going up against a hulking beast that is AJ Brown, that's a whole different challenge. So if I were the Eagles and I were trying to script a game plan, like you said, I would try to put AJ Brown in front of Nate Wiggins and say, let's see if you can cover him, because he is built like Nate Wiggins is built like Devontae Smith. He is built exact opposite of AJ Brown. All right, let's dive into the defense, because this is a Eagles defense that has gotten a lot of production out of their rookie corner. Speaking of rookie cornerbacks and Nate Wiggins, Nate Wiggins was drafted 8 picks after Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo, who has been phenomenal so far for the Eagles this year. According to PFF, Mitchell is the 16th ranked cornerback. Cooper DeJean, coming out of Iowa, who the Ravens had a chance to pick, he was drafted 10 picks after Nate Wiggins, is PFF's number 6 cornerback. Wiggins, by the way, is number 56. So you've got an excellent production out of these two rookie cornerbacks, and they play a very different style, but Vic Fangio, who's their new defensive coordinator, is putting them in the perfect spot to succeed.
Yeah, they are, basically since they got back from their bye, they've been the best defense in football. They are like 50 yards ahead of number 2 in terms of yards per game allowed since they came back from their bye in week 6. They're number 1 in scoring offense. They're number 1 in explosive play rate allowed. All of that leads me to this. Do you remember, Paul, how much we were hyping up the Dolphins defense, the Vic Fangio Dolphins defense, going into that Week 17 game against the Ravens last year? It was not the number 1 explosive play rate defense, but it was like number 2 over its previous 6 weeks. And then the Ravens went out
it just blew
and proceeded to have an
them.
explosive play on literally 20% of their plays. That was a perfect passer rating game for Lamar. I think he was like 18 for 21 for, over 320 yards. You had the Isaiah Likely catch. You had just the offense running wild. And, the Miami defense took some lumps that day. I think they lost, some guys to serious injuries, but that was more so at the end of it. So they were healthy for the most part throughout the course of that game. And still the Ravens just, marched up and down the field against them. And I don't think it's like, Lamar has all the secrets to the Vic Fangio playbook, even though he also did pretty well against him when he faced that Broncos defense, when he still had Hollywood Brown and threw a couple of deep shots in that game. But it's clear that maybe the Vic Fangio magic, perhaps Lamar is somewhat immune to it. I don't know. Philly, it seems like it is really great at taking stuff away over the middle. And that's also what the Steelers did. And that's, I think, a case where Lamar's either got to be willing to get the ball outside or to the flats, or just, challenge some of these cornerbacks on these, deep balls where he's a little bit less accurate than at pretty much all other spots of the field. But I just don't think Lamar is going to be daunted by what this Eagles defense has seen, because he as recently as less than a year ago went up against a really good uh, Dolphins defense and just completely tore them to shreds.
Yeah, I mean the Eagles are getting like all pro caliber play from linebacker Zach Bond. He kind of is the centerpiece that quietly is making this all work. A guy who was kind of an afterthought when he was signed from New Orleans. He was more like an edge rusher when he was with the Saints, and now has been converted to a middle linebacker. And PFF has him literally as the second best linebacker in the NFL behind Fred Warner. And then you've got Jalen Carter up the middle. They just lost Brandon Graham, who that's a big loss for their pass rush, but they've got a whole lot of interior pass rush from Jalen Carter. And when Jordan Davis is on the field, he's more of a run stuffer. Carter is PFF's number 8 interior defender. He just eats up a ton of double teams up the middle and frees up other guys. So I don't know how the interior, offensive line for the Ravens is going to be able to hold up, but we've seen Daniel Falele be able to thwart some interior defenders a whole lot better at least over the last several weeks than he did to start the year.
Yeah, I know we talked about Brandon Graham a little bit with Olivia, which we'll get to pretty soon. But I think the part that wasn't touched on was just his value as a run defender. You wouldn't think a guy at his age would be quite the force that he had been for Philly. But you look at some of the on-off splits. I mean, it is, you wonder just how significant that season-ending tricep injury could be. When he was on the field for the Eagles, they allowed an explosive run on just 5.4% of carries. With him off the field, that doubles to 12.9%. And you think about, Nolan Smith not being especially bulky, Jalix Hunt, who is, a former, D3 super athletic prospect who they might have to play a little bit, not really super sound against the run in college. Can they get up on Kobe Dean, who's definitely shorter and smaller for a linebacker? Zach Bond is not really built especially big. I think he's probably, like 225 pounds at that Eagles linebacker spot. So there's obviously really, really impressive bodies in the middle of that Eagles defensive line with Milton Williams and Jalen Carter and just everyone who lines up inside. But I still think that there are vulnerabilities for the Ravens to attack, especially because Philly's going to do what the Chargers did. They're if the Ravens go spread or even if they don't, they are going to line up with light boxes and dare the Ravens to run because they are that committed to kind of clouding things in the back end for opposing offenses. So I think that is probably going to be in the same way that Saquon's viability is going to be crucial to that Eagles offense. I think the Ravens being able to establish the line of scrimmage is going to be crucial for them. And I just wonder, where they will kind of attack, especially because we don't know, how capable, how ready, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean are for some of the ways that, Todd Monken will kind of put these cornerbacks under pressure.
Right.
As rookies, are they going to have what it takes to stick their nose in on defense and be willing to, get in a the path of a pulling blocker because it's a crack block and you're one-on-one with Derrick Henry in the open field? Are you going to be able to handle that? Because just last year you were having to cover a bunch of jamokes from like the MAC or from Northwestern, and it's a little bit of a different proposition when it's Derrick Henry.
What's your score prediction for this game, Jonas?
Surprisingly, we're both on the Ravens on this one. I've got the Ravens 27-21. I just think that they're going to get the Eagles into enough obvious passing situations where Jalen Hurts is going to get, little Jalen Hurtsy. And you look back at even that game against Washington where the Commanders pass rush was kind of getting after it on third down and flushing him out. And, I think there's probably no more helpless feeling for an Eagles fan than seeing Jalen Hurts just kind of fade in that pocket and start to go to his right and not really know what he's looking at or be unable to deliver the ball with any accuracy because he can be a little bit reckless when he is kind of forced to throw off platform. So maybe I'm a little bit high on the supply of that Ravens Dolphins performance, and maybe I shouldn't be as optimistic about what this Ravens offense can do against the defense that has a credible claim to being the best current performing defense in the NFL. I just think that Lamar, has a certain magic against NFC teams, and until that magic is foiled, I'm just going to ride with the hot hand.
I think that's fair. I've got a closer margin of victory for the Ravens, but I do still think that the Ravens come out on top with a 24-20 victory. I'm looking more at the defensive side of the football and wondering if the Ravens can hang with this Eagles offense. Once, my old English teacher from high school used to say, once is an anomaly, twice is a coincidence, three times is a trend. Once was the Steelers, twice was the Chargers. If they can stop perhaps the best offense that they faced over the last several weeks, maybe this entire season in the Eagles, then I will be fully convinced that Zach Orr has figured this thing out. And I mean, if the Eagles or if the Ravens come out with a victory here and they go to 9-4 and they convincingly beat the Eagles, I mean, we'll be on the postgame podcast on Sunday night talking about this is a Super Bowl caliber team. Whether or not they win the AFC North, they have the chance to really go far because this is a true test. It's another great game. The Ravens have had so many great opponents, so many great games on the schedule. This is another one. I know maybe America's already sick of the Ravens because of how often they've been in primetime and they're going to be, on national TV or on Netflix. I guess that's not national TV on Christmas again. But they're getting a lot of the Ravens. But this is another game where I feel like you could easily put this in a primetime slot. You could easily put this in front of most Americans and they'd love the product because I think it's going to be a really good game. All right. We talked to Olivia Reiner, who covers the Eagles, for an inside perspective on the opponent. She's with the Philadelphia Inquirer. Here's that interview. And now we're joined by Olivia Reiner to give us an inside perspective on the opponent on Sunday, the Philadelphia Eagles. Olivia, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. I'm happy to chat with you guys.
It's your second trip to Baltimore in a matter of months because you were here for the preseason game that ended 16-13. What a barn burner of a game that was. Neither starting quarterback started that game. We got an 11 combined punts between those two teams. What do you think is more likely to happen on Sunday? 11 combined punts again or 11 combined tush pushes between these two teams?
Ooh, between the two teams. I'll go with 11 combined punts, but I don't think that's very likely either. But, these are two pretty good defenses, so maybe we'll see some more punts than we usually would. I don't know, but 11 tush pushes, that sounds like a lot.
It does. But we saw some tight end tush pushes from Baltimore last week, so you never know. I mean, we could get a lot of third and ones, fourth and ones.
The possibilities are endless. It's a good point. We'll see. I love the tush push personally. That's pretty well known. I find it to be super fascinating, and it's like the purest form of football, how it was like originally intended to be played. And what I really like about it, very big tangent here, is just how I think it like gets people really angry. I just think it's amusing. I think it's an interesting play.
It is. And we saw a little bit of that from the Ravens. It's not as pure, I guess, because Lamar's not involved. But hey, we still got some good content from Derrick Henry on Monday when he was saying that he told Mark Andrews that he was going to, quote, push the shit out of him, and hey, he delivered. Speaking of, okay. Actually, I didn't have a good transition for that because the push is a singular thing. But anyway, Gianni or Olivia, you're coming from your availability there on Wednesday. I guess what stuck out to you about maybe what the coordinators or the coaches or what the players said about kind of what is looming in this matchup on Sunday?
For sure. Yeah. I was actually in the locker room today talking to a bunch of the offensive linemen for something I'm working on separately, but something that continued to come up over and over again is just how talented this Ravens run defense is and how it's going to provide a unique challenge. I think the Eagles have been challenged a lot in recent weeks on the ground because of the kind of shift toward the run game that has happened since the Eagles had their bye week in week 5. I think that was kind of like the marker of when things really started to shift for this team for the better because of the fact that they've gone on a 7-game win streak since then. And a lot of it, not all of it, but especially on offense, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they have taken this run first approach. And even though teams know it's coming, and even though teams try to load up the box to stop Saquon Barkley, and I think the Ravens can also probably relate to this with Derrick Henry, the Eagles are still having a lot of success running the ball. And I attribute that not only to the talent of Barkley, but also to the Eagles' offensive line and the way that they have played over this last 7-game stretch. So a lot of the conversation was about the success of the run game, the fact that Barkley is coming off of a 255-yard rushing yard specifically performance, 302 all-purpose yard performance this past week against the Los Angeles Rams. A really impressive game, not just from him, but from that Eagles offensive line and what they were able to do against a really formidable Rams defensive front that has still had a lot of success in the absence of Aaron Donald. So that continues to be a focal point of the Eagles, and the fact that they're anticipating that teams are going to just try to throw a bunch of unscouted looks at them, particularly go against Saquon Barkley and trying to stop the run, and that they just have to be prepared for whatever comes their way.
Yeah, and there are a lot of similarities in the way that these two offenses are built. The Ravens probably lack a number one wide receiver in the sense of an A.J. Brown, like the Eagles have, but you obviously have two electric running backs. You have two dual threat quarterbacks who can take it and run with it if they need to. Do you think the fact that the Eagles offense kind of resembles the Ravens offense will in any way help Vic Fangio and the Eagles defensive players be able to game plan for the Ravens?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think he was kind of asked about that a little bit today, and I'm curious to see how that plays out, considering the fact that there are some similar skill sets on either end, on both sides of the teams, specifically in the fact that Jalen Hurts also provides that rushing threat, and obviously Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry have both had really incredible seasons. So I am kind of curious. I think that maybe stylistically there's still some differences there, but I'm curious to see how those head-to-head, even though they're not exactly like head-to-head matchups, but if there's any a benefit, any similarities that these teams can kind of pull on practicing against these guys and trying to translate that to the game. But it's definitely, I think this is just going to be a really fun game for if you're a football fan in general. Two really good teams going up against each other.
Olivia, you mentioned just the turnaround of this Eagles offense since the bye week. I mean, it's been a while since they were held even under 26 points. I guess when you look at how this matchup might shake out for Jalen Hurts specifically, I know the talking point last year was just kind of how teams were able to rattle him when they were able to get pressure home. But is there anything that you think maybe this Ravens defense or just teams in general have been able to do against Jalen, and maybe what you might expect to see if this game does come down to one specific drive or one specific play that the Ravens might kind of be looking forward to bringing against Jalen when all the cards are on the table.
Yeah, I will say I think Hurts has fared better against the blitz this season than he did last season, and I think he's doing a better job of picking it up and setting the protection. And that hasn't necessarily been the case in every single game, but I think he has fared better against the blitz. He's as many quarterbacks do, pressure is it can be an issue. And he faced a lot of pressure, particularly thinking back to that Tampa Bay Buccaneers game right before the bye week. That was kind of the low point of the season so far for the entire team. But so I think those things could still potentially rear their heads and still potentially cause issues. I think the number one thing that if I'm the Ravens, I'm looking to do against Hurts and this Eagles offense is try to force turnovers. Hurts earlier in the season really struggled with turning the ball over, whether he was throwing interceptions or fumbling it. In recent weeks, he has played much, much, much cleaner. His decisions have been better. And I think that's a huge contributor to the fact that the Eagles have had so much success in recent weeks is the fact that they continue to win the turnover battle. Big part of that, of course, is that the defense is getting more takeaways too. So, but no, Hurts was certainly the culprit in the fact that they weren't winning the takeaway battle earlier in the season. He's cleaned that up substantially. So is there, a way that the Ravens can try to, generate those takeaways, get some pressure on him, get him, he can be very good and dangerous when he scrambles and escapes the pocket. So there's always that risk that you present, but can you force him to make a bad decision in throwing the ball? That is, if I'm the Ravens, I'm trying to do that. That said, he has been able to cut down on that aspect of his game in recent weeks, which has been a huge benefit to the Eagles.
And we saw the Ravens, John Harbaugh, take perhaps a page from Nick Sirianni's playbook and getting very aggressive on fourth down in the Ravens' most recent win. These are two coaches that have taken a lot of heat this season from their respective fan bases and have still continued to win despite it all. Obviously, John Harbaugh has the much better and longer track record than Nick Sirianni. But what has it been like covering a coach that many were expecting at some point during the season to perhaps be out of a job? But at the same time, this is a team that is currently one of the hottest in the NFL on this 7-game win streak. And it seems like the team is for the most part buying into what he's selling.
Absolutely. I think the team has really, throughout this whole time, even when from the outside looking in, it seemed like maybe Nick Sirianni is on the hot seat. Seat's getting a little toasty. It certainly felt that way. Starting the season 2-2, it was not looking good for a little while early on. And the fact that they have been able to turn it around this far, I think speaks a lot to the fact that the team never once seemed to lose faith in Sirianni and the messaging that he has had from the very beginning. I think one of the overriding messages during this 7-game win streak that has resonated with the group is just to stay humble and to not, right now they're getting praised a lot by media, by fans, whoever. And Sirianni has been very vocal about the fact that the team needs to continue to put their head down and that they haven't won anything yet. And I don't know, this team faced a lot of adversity this past season. The fact that they kind of collapsed after starting the season 10-1. So we're around that time now, this time last year when the wheels really fell off for the Eagles. So they all know, Sirianni knows that things can go south really quickly and that they can't, get too comfortable at this point. So he has handled everything, I would say, just from my perspective. I think he has handled things well. I know just kind of getting into it with fans earlier in the season, that felt like that was the low point, and he came under a lot of heat for that. But since then, he has, kept this team on track. And I feel like he said a lot of the right things, at least publicly, about the way that they are going to be going forward in terms of staying humble and continuing to improve on a weekly basis. Because as good as the team is playing right now, and I feel like the defense is really flying high, and I still feel like there is more out there for this offense to achieve, which is probably a little bit crazy to say because Saquon has been playing so well. But in terms of the passing game, I still feel like there are players, I don't know if we'll ever see a completely balanced game on offense, but there may come a time, and it may very well be this week, where the Eagles are going to have to rely a little bit more on their passing game, and they haven't had to in recent weeks. So can they continue to win in multiple ways? I think that is going to be a valuable thing that we'll find out going forward as they make this postseason push coming up.
Olivia, last question from me. Obviously, this defense is flying high right now, but I think you probably can't overstate the loss of Brandon Graham, especially to that defensive front. What do you think his absence could mean for the Eagles, especially going into this game against probably the best offense in the NFL right now? I know he's not a guy who plays every single snap for that Philly front, but he's still an important veteran presence. What do you think his absence could mean to that Eagles defense, and I guess how are they kind of potentially going to try to make up for him on Sunday and then moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you think, okay, Brandon Graham, 36-year-old defensive end, especially outside looking in. And I mean, by outside looking in, I mean outside of the Philly market, how much of an impact could he really possibly be having on this team? And I think he had a really big impact on this team and on the defensive end rotation. He was playing almost half of the defensive snaps this year, which is a pretty substantial amount. I think he was playing 46% of the defensive snaps, which is his largest share of the defensive snaps since 2020. And he's been really productive on those snaps too. He was up to 3.5 sacks this season before sustaining his season-ending triceps tear against the Los Angeles Rams. So he was very productive. He had been very productive, and his presence was almost became more important recently because Bryce Huff, who the Eagles signed in the offseason, he just went on injured reserve last week with a wrist injury. He got surgery. So now the Eagles are down 2 players among their edge rusher core, which is, it's a substantial loss. So now they're down to Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, and Jalix Hunt. Smith is in his second season. Hunt is a rookie. So you've got 2 very young, slowly ascending, but very inexperienced guys. Smith especially has been coming on as of late. He's taking more and more snaps on. Hunt is still very much a rookie and is still transitioning to the NFL game. But I would expect to see the 2 of them take on a bigger role going forward in the absence of Graham. We talked to Vic Fangio today, as we mentioned earlier, and Josh Sweat, he kind of made it seem like Sweat's snap count it was going to more or less stay the same. And Sweat has actually seen his snaps decrease from last year, but he's also been more productive on fewer snaps this year. So I'm sure they're trying to find the sweet spot for him to keep him fresh while still being able to generate pressure up front. And then, of course, the Eagles also just they claimed Chuck Harris from the Carolina Panthers off waivers yesterday. So Harris was at practice today. I didn't have a chance to talk to him, but presumably he will now be getting into the mix, getting into the rotation. Curious to see how much he plays on Sunday. But yeah, it's an area of concern. Eagles have been getting some good pass rush from the interior defensive line, particularly with Jalen Carter and Milton Williams, especially Williams the other day when Carter was double teamed pretty substantially against the Rams, which I would imagine maybe teams will try to continue to do against him. But yeah, they're definitely the loss of Graham, and that's just on the field, right? Like we haven't even talked about the loss of him off the field. He's a veteran leader in that locker room, not just among the defensive front and not just the defense, but he's a captain of the entire team, and a lot of players look up to him as a success story. He was someone who he was essentially labeled a bust among the Philly media after his first 4 seasons in the league, and had really turned it around and was going now in his 15th year with the Eagles. So it's a huge loss for them. And I'm very curious to see how they try to fill in with some of the other players now that they have in his room and compensate for his impact on the field.
Yeah, I heard that he had played more games as an Eagle than anybody ever during the last broadcast, which is kind of crazy to think about. My last question for you, Olivia, and I'm going to put you on the spot with this because you are good friends with our current coworker, Gianna Hahn, and your former coworker in Gianna Hahn. You have made the trip to Baltimore several times. She's made the trip to Philly several times. Which food scene is better? Because Gianna is obviously a big foodie, and I know that she likes to drag friends out to try all kinds of food. And also, are there any Baltimore spots that you've been to or that you're looking to try when you come to Baltimore this weekend?
So here's my issue. The places that I have been to, I don't know if I recall like the names of the places that I've been to. So I can like throw out some of the places that I've been to and try to like see if you know them. But like ultimately, I'm pulling up my camera roll right now. Like, oh, where were we? We went to a really good Italian restaurant in Little Italy the last time I was in Baltimore.
They're literally all good in Little Italy.
So you know what? I have the receipt because La Scala.
La Scala is excellent. That's maybe one of my favorites. We got to get a sponsorship from La Scala on this podcast, Jonas.
It was phenomenal. Oh my gosh. I'm like looking at the photos on my food, the photos on my phone right now of the food, and my mouth is watering. Maybe we should go back there. That was really good. And then I came this summer actually, and we went crab picking. My first time. I had never done done the whole crab situation. The very first crab that I tried to open, I immediately cut my thumb. So just for the rest of the time that we were sitting there, my thumb was just like burning.
Well, Old Bay really goes well in a cut finger too.
Oh, it was just like the cut was just like bright orange because of all the seasoning that was like getting caked onto it. It was probably a little gross, definitely very painful, but I love the whole experience. It's like less about, you don't want to go and be hungry necessarily because it's not a lot of food.
Yes.
But it's a great like social experience to be there with friends and to chat. And so I loved it. It was awesome. I feel like I haven't experienced enough of the Baltimore food scene to really definitively say one is better than the other, because the Philly food scene is fabulous. There's so many great restaurants here. But the restaurants that I have been to in Baltimore have been phenomenal. And we'll see. We haven't really talked about, I'm coming down there on Saturday. We haven't talked about what we might do for dinner, but knowing Gianna, she probably has something spectacular.
Oh,
in
yeah.
mind,
Yeah. And she'll make a TikTok out of it. Don't worry. I think the best part about the fact that this game's at 4:25 on Sunday is you have time for brunch. And Baltimore is an underrated breakfast and brunch city. So a lot of great places that you can go to. Blue Moon Cafe in Fells, which she's probably taken you to at some point. Miss Shirley's, obviously. They're going to be, there's plenty of opportunities for you Sunday.
I have been to Miss Shirley's. I have been there, and that was also great. I feel like maybe I've been to more places than I am remembering, but yeah, no, it's you're getting me even more excited for this weekend. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Paul.
Jonas, any recommendations you want to throw out there?
Oh, Miss Shirley's, the Italian spot. I mean, you can't
all
go
the places
wrong.
I've already been to.
Jonas, big foodie, even bigger foodie than Gianna. Let me tell you.
Hey, I wouldn't mind going back there. They were great.
Oh yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy Baltimore over the weekend, and we'll see you Sunday. Thanks so much. And where can before we get you out of here, where can people find all your work?
Yeah, so over on inquire.com, you can catch all of my written work, and then I'm also on all of the social places. I'm Reiner Olivia on X, and then on the other two platforms, Blue Sky and Threads, I'm Olivia Reiner. So one version of my first and last name, whatever you search, hopefully my name comes up. And yeah, thank you guys. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
All right, that just about does it for the Banner Ravens podcast. We will be back with another episode on Sunday night to recap the Eagles and the Ravens. I already learned my lesson from June when the Phillies came to town, and I called it a potential World Series matchup. This is, I'm not going to do that again. Call this a potential Super Bowl matchup, but it should be a good one. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Write us a good review of the Banner Ravens podcast, 5 stars, and I'll read it out here on the show. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in. And